I'm Sarah Kenzier, the author of the best-selling books The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight.
I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the United States and rising autocracy around the world.
And today we are talking to Bill Browder, the author of the must-read book, Red Notice. So Bill is joining Gaslit Nation for an important conversation as part of our Gaslit Nation summer reading series, but we're going to play an excerpt of our discussion because it is so timely, given a lot of big news that has happened in terms of Kremlin aggression and the West's ongoing weak response. But first, Bill Browder's bio from his website. I'll read from that now. Bill Browder is the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, which was the investment advisor to the largest foreign investment fund in Russia until 2005, when Bill was denied entry to the country and declared a, quote, threat to national security as a result of his battle against corporate corruption. Following his expulsion, the Russian authorities raided his offices, seized Hermitage funds and investment companies, and used them to steal $230 million of taxes that the companies had previously paid. When Browder's lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, investigated the crime, he was threatened by the same officers he implicated, tortured for 358 days, and killed in custody at the age of 37 in November 2009. Since then, Browder has spent years fighting for justice for Mr. Magnitsky. The Russian government exonerated and even promoted some of the officials involved, so Browder took the case to America, where his campaigning led to the U.S. Congress adopting the Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act in 2012, which imposed visa sanctions and asset freezes on those involved in the detention, ill treatment, and death of Sergei Magnitsky, as well as in other human rights abuses. This law was the first time the U.S. sanctioned Russia in 35 years and became the model for all subsequent U.S. sanctions against Russia. Browder is currently working to have similar legislation passed in Magnitsky's name across the European Union and elsewhere. We want to just get to the news. So what does the hijacking of a dissident from Belarus on a flight traveling between the EU countries, what does that mean now?
I think it's like a whole new ballgame in terms of dictators doing brazen and bad stuff. I mean, it's on the level of brazenness of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi by Mohammed bin Salman, where they basically used an embassy to conduct a murder and mutilation. And so, I mean, thankfully, Roman Protasevich is still alive, but bringing a commercial jet down with a fighter plane to grab an enemy of a dictator is crossing all sorts of boundaries, red lines, everything. And if there is not a really harsh and punishing reaction to this, it's just going to send a message to other dictators that this is now a new tool that can be used. And there's a lot of other dictators who would probably like to bring planes down. I'm sure the Chinese and the Iranians and the Russians and all sorts of other people will look at this, are all watching very carefully right now.
What kind of reaction or repercussions do you think would be appropriate for this situation?
Well, the repercussions that really matter, and the only ones that really work well, are when you go after the money of the dictators and those close to them and those who support them. So, the EU has announced no more flights over Belarus, no more Belarusian flights in Europe, and, various things like that, and even sanctions. But if the sanctions just apply to like the deputy minister of transport who made the order, that's not going to do anything. However, if the sanctions go after the Russian oligarch who's been funding the Belarusian regime, funding Lukashenko, that will have some impact. And so, and by the way, there's no mystery to who these people are. The Belarusian opposition has got a list, as do the Russian opposition, of who the money men are for these dictators. But you have to go after the money. If you go after anything else, they just look at it and carry on.
Right. It's just symbolic. So, as you mentioned, the Russian opposition, Alexei Navalny, provided helpfully a list of people for the Biden administration to sanction who are helping prop up Putin's corruption. Why do you think the U.S. generally and the EU are reluctant to go after the money people?
On the EU side, it's really easy because in the EU, there's 27 member states. They have to have unanimity in order to make any decisions. And so you have veto rights for little countries like Hungary, which is run by a junior varsity Putin Viktor Orban, or Cyprus or Malta. These are corrupted countries that will do the bidding of Russia and water down the list. And one of the big problems with Biden is that in his efforts to sort of turn over a new page from Trump, he now wants to be intensely multilateral. He doesn't want to be unilateral. And so he wants to coordinate with the Europeans, who are all getting vetoed by, the US foreign policy is being dictated by the Hungarians. And so you end up with this sort of like really watered down, lowest common denominator foreign policy, because of these dysfunctions in the way that decisions are getting made.
So it's sort of how the U.S. government is currently operating, with Mitch McConnell in Congress and others, and Joe Manchin and others blocking a lot of much needed legislation, and like a commission for January 6th and so forth.
Well, you have all sorts of dysfunctions, and in this particular case, and then you also have Biden, who is doing a lot of good stuff in foreign policy, but he's a bit cautious. I mean, he just announced a summit with Putin. Putin shouldn't be rewarded with this kind of recognition. He should be ignored. He should be ignored and contained, not engaged and feted, which is effectively what a U.S.-Russia summit is all about.
Yeah, just so our listeners are clear on what's happening, a summit has been announced for June 16th in Switzerland. We're going to air this clip before that so that your opinions get through. So, you believe Biden should not be having this meeting. If he does go through with it anyway, what goals should he have? Like, what should this accomplish? And what should Biden watch out for from Putin?
Well, so by having the summit, Putin already accomplishes 80% of what he needs, which is being put on the same stage as the most important, powerful world leader. I mean, just remember, Russia is a country with an economy the size of the state of New York, a military budget 90% less than the US military budget. It's really a regional player. The only thing that they have is nuclear weapons, but we're in a world of mutually assured destruction. And so there's not going to be any use of nuclear weapons. And so it seems like a really bad idea to even have this summit, because all that's going to happen is Putin is going to use it to his advantage in terms of raising his own stature. And what Putin has done recently, I mean, he has hacked the US election. He's invaded Crimea. He shot down passenger planes. He's cheated in the Olympics. He's got all sorts of fugitives holed up in his country that he won't extradite to other countries. He's poisoned his rival. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. He doesn't deserve any type of engagement. And there's no way that Biden can have a meeting with him without giving him the gift of recognition.
Well, then why do you think Biden is doing it?
Because the people surrounding Biden are in this old world school of, we must engage Russia. It's like the people who still use IBM PCs, this old historic way of like statecraft, that they have nuclear weapons, we have nuclear weapons, we must engage with them, we want to avoid nuclear holocausts, we must talk to each other. And Putin views this as just like, sort of craven weakness. And every US president has done the same thing. You had George W. Bush, who met with Putin, looked into his eyes, saw his soul, and then things got really horrible between Bush and Putin. And then you had Obama, who wanted to do a reset. And then you had Trump, who says like, we're going to get along. Wouldn't it be great if we got along? And they all have different words for it and different styles about it, but it's all the same thing. And now you have Biden, who wants to have a summit with this guy. And I've objected just as strongly when Trump was having his summit with the guy. Putin doesn't deserve this type of recognition.
Yeah, it seems incredibly reckless, just given all of the things that you listed in terms of attacks that Russia has carried out on the US over the last few years. And I would add to that all of the cyber attacks, including the ones that took place during the Obama administration on various governmental institutions, as well as the one launched in 2020, which is, the worst cyber attack on the United States in its history. I'm just trying to figure out, because while you're right that there's this continuum of people being unable to see Russia clearly for the threat that it is, we did have an unusual situation, to say the least, with Trump as the president, Trump as a Kremlin asset who was bolstered into the position by Putin, by oligarchs, by Kremlin operatives. Why has the Biden administration not failed to learn from that? Because we're definitely not dealing in hypotheticals anymore here.
No, there's no hypotheticals at all. I mean, look, the Russians were paying Afghan mercenaries to kill American troops. I mean, it just goes on and on. I don't know why Biden is making these decisions. All I can say is that it's the wrong decision. Either he's got the wrong instincts or the people advising him have the wrong instincts and he shouldn't be having the summit. And when he does have the summit, it's really hard to have a summit and say, we're going to tie you up in knots and sanction you and punish you for all these terrible things you do, because that's not what you do in a summit.
Yeah, and I want to point out, you mentioned the Kremlin putting bounties on the heads of U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, which led to real casualties. That reporting has all been confirmed. There was some noise that came out recently that the NSA wasn't as confident as the CIA, but the point is that the U.S. government acknowledged that this was happening and it led to real casualties. And the New York Times did some great reporting on it.
You can take that off the list. And there's 50 other things on the list. There's just so much bad stuff. This guy is a menace to the world. And there's no question. It's objective. He's, used Novichok to poison his political opponent, used Novichok to poison people in Salisbury, used polonium to kill Litvinenko. I mean, people have been killed in Berlin and Vienna. And he's a criminal of the first order running a state. And for us to give him any kind of recognition as a world leader is just the wrong thing to do.
Do you think that that Biden is acting out of a hostage situation? Do you think that because Putin's shown again and again that he's willing to be ruthless and trample over all these norms, do you think that Biden, who is right now trying to end a pandemic and an economic crisis that has come with it, that Biden is essentially buying his time with Putin and doing these gestures to try to lower the temperature between them? Because Putin, as we saw with the ransomware attack of Russian hackers, which are certainly operating under the knowledge of the Russian criminal state, just disrupted a major pipeline in the U.S. And so do you think that there's a bit of a hostage situation, that the U.S. is in a weaker position and it's sort of stuck catering or giving Putin what they want, at least in the short term?
Well, I mean, that would argue that Biden is trying to appease Putin. And Putin, well, first of all, appeasement has proven not to work with any type of dictator. And it certainly has proven not to work with Putin. And so Putin will just use this to his advantage. And so, the only thing that Putin understands is hard, vicious consequences for stuff that he does. And it's not as if the United States doesn't have the capacity to inflict those on Russia. And they should be inflicted on Russia. I mean, it's ridiculous. Putin is engaging, he's effectively declared a hybrid, asymmetric, plausibly deniable war against us, and we're not responding.
So essentially, just to recap, because I think this is really important for people to understand, is that the United States, especially under Biden, who wants to bring back global leadership, or we're all together in this strong Western alliance. So Biden can't go it alone and take these measures alone. There has to be some European support. And the EU can't go along because states like Hungary, which are dictatorships on their own, have veto power over what the EU does. So that's essentially what we're up against.
Yeah, but I mean, there's absolutely no reason why the United States can't take decisions in its own national interest, whether Europe goes along with us or not. It doesn't mean it's completely, it would be nice to do it and it would be better to do it when you can. Should the U.S. let pipelines be obstructed because of Hungary? No, of course not.
Right. And the U.S. took down FIFA, and soccer, football, as it's known, is sacred in Europe. So the U.S. had no problem doing that, apparently.
And the U.S. has done lots of things that have been unilateral, which have been very helpful in terms of, ending conflicts or punishing bad guys in different places. It's great when we can do these things multilaterally, and one should strive to do that when it's possible. And when it's not, the U.S. should act firmly and consistently with its position in the world in its national interest.
So there was reporting recently in Axios that the Biden administration was planning on waiving sanctions on Nord Stream 2. So that project could, in effect, move forward. Could you talk a little bit about why Nord Stream 2 matters and what you think the Biden administration should do in regards to it?
Well, so at the moment, there's one pipeline that Russia uses to export its gas. And that pipeline goes through Ukraine and Poland and various other countries. And as a result of that, Russia can't be as horrible and dangerous and murderous and expansive against Ukraine as it could otherwise, because Ukraine has one huge piece of leverage, which is stopping the flow of gas if Russia were to invade their country, for example. And so Putin has understood that he doesn't like for anyone to have that type of leverage against him. And so he's built a second pipeline, which is called Nord Stream 2. And Nord Stream 2 goes through the Baltic Sea. It avoids all these pesky countries that Putin doesn't like, and it goes straight into Germany. And in order to make sure that this happened properly, he ended up paying a bunch of highly influential Germans, including the former Chancellor of Germany, Gerhard Schröder, to run around Germany and sort of grease the wheels and make sure the whole thing worked. And so as a result of that, Germany agreed to have this pipeline, help finance this pipeline. And what this pipeline does, which is really horrific from a geopolitical perspective, is it makes Germany and I guess the rest of Europe more dependent on Russian gas. And so not only does Russia win this geopolitical point of avoiding Ukraine, but they also end up getting Germany more hooked on their gas. And so what happens when Germany is more hooked on their gas? If they do something horrific, like take a plane down or kill Alexei Navalny or something like that, there'll be all sorts of internal discussions in Germany to say, wow, that's terrible, that's outrageous, we condemn it, but we can't do anything about it because we're dependent on their gas. And so it's a total sort of, slam dunk win for Putin. And the US had the right attitude about this whole thing, which was to say, no, we're not going to allow that. We're going to sanction anybody involved. And that was all sort of good and consistent. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the sanction is going to be lifted off the main company and off the main guy who's involved in that by the Biden administration. It's really sort of perplexing, infuriating for anybody who understands the situation. And it raises a lot of questions.
What's really strange is the Biden administration keeps coming out with a position that they want to have a predictable relationship with Russia. They keep using that word. They want to have a predictable relationship with Russia. Russia's been really predictable. If there's one thing that's helpful that they do is you just imagine the most ruthless thing they can do, the leverage they can wield, and they'll take it. And so it's really strange that the Biden administration keeps beating that on. What advice do you have for them to sort of wake up and understand that there is no negotiating with terrorists when it comes to Putin's regime?
Well, there can be a very predictable relationship, which is that we will come down with like a ton of bricks on you every time you do anything that we don't like. That's predictable. There's nothing unpredictable about that. Very simple. The message should be clear. To use this idea that we want to have a predictable relationship, which means we're not going to get mad at you when you do terrible stuff, that's called appeasement. We all know where that leads.
Yeah, without question. So it's really disturbing because there are some people who are held up as really strong, renowned Russia experts. Fiona Hill is one. But then Fiona Hill came out with an infuriating position where she and others, I believe, published a letter in Politico, or was picked up by Politico, saying that we have to do business with Putin. We have to have we need to work with Russia where we can work with Russia. We need to have a reset. And there was that haunting, ominous word again, reset, because there was a Russian reset. And then Russia went on to invade Ukraine and deliberately bomb civilians in Syria and so forth. And of course, attack our democracy in 2016. So it seems like a lot of respectable folks inside the Beltway are very much as part of this problem. Who are some of the folks that you think should be listened to, should have a seat at the table, that Biden should be leaning on to get a real pragmatic view on who Putin is and how to contain his aggression?
Well, first of all, just because somebody is smart and wonderful and respectable doesn't mean that every idea they have is a good idea. We live in a pluralistic world where people can disagree. And that's just a bad idea to reset. I mean, there's no question about it, as we've discussed. And so it doesn't mean that Fiona Hill is bad. She's a wonderful person who has had a lot of great ideas, but in this particular area, that's a bad idea. And in terms of who the right people are, I don't run the headhunting operation at the National Security Council. I can tell you who was a terrible idea. They were considering a guy named Matt Rozhansky, who was like the ultimate Russia appeasement resetting guy who they were thinking about. And there was such a storm of outrage when his name came up that they nixed him off the list. I guess part of the problem we have here is that the Biden administration is using the same well that the Obama administration used of people. It's like a lot of Obama retreads coming back and trying out the same stuff that they were doing during the Obama administration. And Obama may have done a lot of good things in a lot of areas, but he had a pretty terrible policy when it came to Russia. And I had to fight him at every step of the way to get the Magnitsky Act passed because he didn't want to do it.
Why didn't Obama want the Magnitsky Act passed?
Because he wanted to reset his relations with Russia. And he thought that like challenging them on human rights and kleptocracy wouldn't be a good way to do that. And this was not a Democrat-Republican thing. That in both sides of the political aisle in Congress, they thought it was a really good idea to have a Magnitsky Act, and it passed the Senate 92-4. It passed the House of Representatives with 89%, and Obama couldn't do anything about it. He had to sign it into law. He did so unwillingly and annoyed that his hand was forced on that issue.
See, this is interesting because this was in 2012, right? December 2012 when the Magnitsky Act was passed in the Senate?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. Because that's not that long after Mueller gave this famous speech about the Iron Triangles, which is basically the coordination of state corruption, traditional organized crime, and corporate corruption. And the nexus of that, he said in the speech, was Semyon Mogilievich's operation. It was the Russian mafia. Mueller, as FBI head at the time, said that the Russian mafia was one of the greatest threats facing Western democracies, and said specifically that kleptocracies forming, that are very difficult to prosecute, analyze, keep up with, pose a threat. So given that this was all kind of out in the open, what accounts for the reluctance of not just Obama, but kind of other officials to really get on top of this and prevent these kind of attacks on our democracy? Because ultimately it is an attack.
Well, I don't think that Russia was really sort of prioritized as a major issue. I think that Obama was looking at domestic policies, and he kind of thought of this whole issue with Russia as like something he had to deal with, but didn't really want to deal with, and just wanted to sort of sweep it under the carpet. And that's how we ended up in this situation where he basically gave Putin a pass to sort of do whatever he wanted to, and Putin knew that Obama wouldn't do anything after the whole red line in Syria not being enforced. It became clear to Putin and lots of other people that you could do what you want and America is not going to get involved. And as a result, Putin felt like he had carte blanche to go into Ukraine, which he did. And then he had carte blanche to hack the US elections, which he did. And we ended up with Donald Trump as a result.
Yeah, and one of the many things that concerns me about that result is we know that at the end of Trump's administration, at the end of his term, he pardoned a lot of the key players that were involved in that 2016 election interference and were involved directly with the Kremlin. People like Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn and Roger Stone, and then, of course, you still see Trump and others in that circle running around. They now have access to all U.S. state secrets as a result of inhabiting the executive branch for 4 years, yet they display very little loyalty to the United States. What are the national security implications of that?
Well, I can speak from my own personal experience of security implications from Trump and his affection for Putin, because at the 2018 summit, after Mueller had just indicted the 12 GRU officers who hacked the election, Trump went to meet with Putin in Helsinki, and one of the journalists asked Putin, "Are you going to hand over the 12 GRU agents?" And Putin said, "Well, I'll do that if America hands over Bill Browder." And they went to Trump and said, "What do you think?" He said, "I think it's a great idea, an incredible offer." He said, putting aside all this theoretical stuff, Trump was ready to hand me over to Putin. So that's about as bad as you can get.
What was your reaction?
my reaction was utter shock to think that the president of the United States would be ready to hand me over. And by the way, the next day, Putin then added 11 other people to the list who were all the Americans involved in helping with the Magnitsky Act. Mike McFaul, former ambassador to Russia, Kyle Parker, the person who wrote the Magnitsky Act, a bunch of people from the Department of Homeland Security who prosecuted the Preverzone case, which was connected to the Magnitsky, which was Russian money laundering in New York, connected to the Magnitsky case, and various others. And Trump was still willing to hand these people over. And it took 4 days and a vote in the Senate, 98-0, before he backed off.
You can hear more of our discussion with Bill Browder as we feature his book, Red Notice, a true story of high finance, murder, and one man's fight for justice, as part of the Gaslit Nation Summer Reading Series, running in July and August. Other books and conversations include Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself by Amanda Littman. All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate, a powerful anthology edited by Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson, and a conversation with cultural historian and filmmaker Nelson George on the power of art in dangerous times. We look forward to bringing you conversations with these experts over the summer and encourage you to read their work. The books we selected will help you stay grounded in the important work we need to be doing right now to protect our democracy and our planet.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
We want to encourage you to donate to your local food bank, which is experiencing a spike in demand. We also encourage you to donate to giveindia.org to help Indians battling COVID-19.
We also encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Syria. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube.
Our production managers are Nicholas Torres and Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Todd S. Pearlstein,
Pat,
Kenny Main,
John Schoenthaler,
Frank Chiquette,
Kenneth Reed,
Ellen McGirt,
Jill Farron,
Larry Gasson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Lex Reed,
Andrea Scalzo,
Melessia Howland,
Karen Heisler,
Jordan Sanders,
Ann Bertino,
Rachel Winder,
T.R. Dunstan,
Kim,
John Millet or John Millett,
David East,
Shannon Nacy,
Ida,
Chris Fellow,
Dodie Pop,
Kristen Bredemus,
Gabrielle R.,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Rich Holcomb,
Jeremy Thompson,
Thomas Scheibe,
Kelsey Malsom,
Julie Matthews,
Meganopolis,
Mark,
Matthew Womack,
Sean Berg,
Kristen Kuster,
Tracy Ash,
Benjamin Galuza,
Kai Gillis,
Sharon Hattrick,
Irv Robinson,
Keith Gultshock,
William Barry Reeves,
Janet Robinson,
John Atrisk,
Richard Smith,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Sandra Kolnitz,
Katie Masuris,
John Laughlin,
Jeff Thompson,
James D. Leonard,
Evan Rosemore,
Chip Salzenberg,
Leo Chalupa,
Carol Golstad,
Michael Wooldridge,
Kramer, no. Kramer, no criming.
Oh God, it's like a Dora the Explorer reference too. All right, excuse me. Jason Benke,
Marcus J. Trent,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Jeremy Lewis,
Trigve,
Christine M.,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
Nicole Spear,
Kelly Ranson,
Brian Tejuden,
Christy Vitale,
Maureen Murphy,
Michelle Dash,
Jans Alstrup Rasmussen,
Zachary Lemon,
Dorothy Kamerick,
Victoria Olson,
Alabama,
ZW,
Lisa LaFlame,
Jason Bainbridge,
Catherine Anderson Carina,
Sarah Gray,
Lawrence Graham, Mike
Tripico,
Diana Gallagher,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
Jennifer Slavic,
Rhonda White,
P.A. Isma,
David Porter,
Kate Cotton,
Kim Mellon,
Leah Campbell,
Lynn Schneider,
Jared Lombardo,
Karen Humphreys,
Giles Boquet,
Ann Marshall,
Irina Guardia,
Eric Kaplan,
Sonia Bogdanovich,
Pam Paris.
Tanya Chalupa.
Thank you all so much for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Thank you.